Welcome, I'm Bruce Munro, and with me is International Relations Specialist Professor Robert Patman, and this is Global Insight. Petrol prices are falling. It's good news, but what does it mean? Welcome, Robert.
Morning, Bruce.
In the past week, the price of crude oil has tumbled, and prices at the pump have been coming down as well.
Yep.
What are the facts?
Well, last Monday we saw the biggest drop in crude oil prices, the global crude oil market price, since 1991. And it dropped from about $46 a barrel to $35 a barrel. And it seems to be coming down further. And one of the reasons for the sudden reduction was that a long-standing alliance between two of the world's largest oil producers, Russia and Saudi Arabia, has ruptured. And now they are openly competing each other by slashing their prices. And of course this has had knock-on effects for prices at the pump in New Zealand, for example, and many other countries.
Why would Russia and Saudi Arabia both increase production? Because surely increasing supply just hurts their profit margins.
Yes, to say it was a surprise to many observers was an understatement. It seemed strange because on the face of it, Saudi Arabia and Russia benefit by cooperating and coordinating their prices. But during the last 3 years, Russia has been a de facto member of OPEC, the oil exporting cartel, which is based in Vienna and led by Saudi Arabia. So it hasn't been a member of OPEC, but it's been a de facto ally of it. And it's coordinated its oil prices and its oil production policies. Now, this recent move is all to do with coronavirus. Coronavirus has led to a significant drop in demand for oil in two very important Asian countries, South Korea and China. And so the Saudis decided to address this problem of falling demand by cutting oil production to push the price up. The problem was, from the Russian point of view, the plan that the Saudis came up with meant that the Russians had to bear a disproportionate burden of the plan. The Saudis proposed that the 15 members of the cartel, plus Russia, would reduce oil production by 1 million barrels a day. And Russia, it was proposed, would cut their own production as part of that effort by 500,000 barrels a day. So the Russians believed they were absorbing the lion's share of the reduction. And Russia has taken the strategic decision that rather to try to coordinate and its policies with Saudi Arabia and OPEC, it can preserve its own interests and its market share better by going it alone. And so we now have an open and quite dramatic price war going on between two of the world's largest oil producers.
We're being warned that we're running out of fossil fuels. These two countries being willing to slug it out in this way by increasing production, does this suggest that there's actually more oil in the ground than some suggest?
Well, it's very difficult to have precise estimates how much oil there is, but many global energy analysts quote BP, British Petroleum. 2014, they gave an estimate that based on then current prices in 2014, the Earth probably had about 53 years it could expect to enjoy comparable access to oil, which it does now. In other words, it could expect more of the same for 53 years. This is not a science, of course, and there are new discoveries. So it's very difficult to say with precision, but I think it's fair to say that oil's not going to be there forever. And of course, there's mounting concern, particularly amongst young people, about dependence on fossil fuels and all the damage it's doing to our climate, our global climate.
So we are heading towards a situation still, obviously, where we're going to have a shortage of this resource of fossil fuels. So why would these two countries be willing to increase production at this point?
Well, there's several theories going around because this has come as such a surprise. Not surprisingly, many analysts are divided in their opinions, and the Russians haven't given, as far as I know, an official explanation why they're doing this. One view says that the Russians are basically seeking to undermine some of the shale oil companies which have helped make America leader of the pack in terms of oil production. And certainly this price war that's developing is really hurting the shale oil sector in the United States. Many companies are struggling to survive now. They've gone from a profitable situation to one where they're rapidly losing a lot of money and market share. So, but there's perhaps a more convincing explanation, because the downside of that explanation is that actually, even if the oil shale sector in the United States is eliminated, Russia is not short of other competitors on the oil scene. So it seems an extremely risky move just to simply eliminate one sector of competition. And the other thing is, oil companies will simply buy up those oil shale companies. So that when you think it through, there's quite a few objections to that theory. The second theory is quite simple and perhaps more convincing, which is Russia believes, on balance, it can best protect and perhaps extend its market share by going it alone in the current situation. I think it was deeply concerned that it was bearing, as it saw it, the lion's share of the burden for cutting back production. And so it's taken quite a high risk move. It's basically slashing oil prices and competing with Saudi Arabia in doing so. The reason it's so very risky is it's more expensive for Russians to get oil out of the ground than it is Saudi Arabia. It costs, according to one analyst, it costs Russia about $40 to get oil out per barrel, to get oil out of the ground, and something like $8 to get per barrel for Saudi Arabia. So the longer this goes on, I think the Saudis calculate it's going to be the Russians who blink first. The problem for the Russians and for the Saudis, actually, because they're both going to get hurt in this. In fact, falling oil prices is going to hurt all oil companies, is that we have a dramatic drop, not just in demand for oil in Asia, but globally, as coronavirus spreads. So Russia, it looks to me, could be in a situation shortly where it hasn't necessarily increased its market share due to the competition with Saudi Arabia and other oil producers. And it's also seeing a drop in its oil revenue rather than collaborating to keep oil prices up. So the stakes are very high for not only Russia as a country, but for Mr. Putin, I think, in particular.
And with COVID-19, coronavirus, this pandemic is causing a global economic downturn. Could the falling oil prices actually help soften that downturn, or are there other things going on here that mean that won't
No,
help?
I don't think it's those of us who have cars and getting petrol from the pumps. It's nice to see the price fall. But what we're seeing is a complete slowdown in the global economy. Many people won't be able to get to work, self-isolation. We've seen nothing yet with this pandemic. What's going to happen, according to the World Health Organization. So I don't think this is an attempt by two powerful countries in the oil sector to look after themselves. But they're going to find there's limits to how far they can look after themselves without cooperation. And coronavirus doesn't respect boundaries or borders. So I'm a bit skeptical myself that either Saudi Arabia or Russia are going to get any great advantage out of this price war they're engaging in, simply because the backdrop, the global economy, the state of the global economy looks so unpromising at the moment, with the global stock market falling rapidly and demand for products falling as well. It's very difficult to see how this situation is going to be resolved at the moment.
And the spat between Russia and Saudi Arabia, how do you think that will get sorted out?
Well, presumably at some point, and I don't think it's going to be far away, because I think the costs for both sides are really considerable. I think Saudi Arabia calculates with its greater reserves in terms of cash, currency reserves, it can withstand this war longer. Russia is particularly taking a chance because it's very, very dependent on the export of fossil fuels. Saudi Arabia is as well, but I think Saudi Arabia is perhaps better cushioned for this sort of competition. Both believe they can benefit from this. We're about to find out who has got a more accurate appreciation of the situation. My own view is both will be hurt and both will be unpleasantly surprised by the events that follow. But it's very difficult to predict. It may be that within a few days, one or both of them will quietly meet and decide that they need to coordinate after all.
So to the question, how much longer are we going to get cheaper petrol, you think days rather than weeks?
I'm not sure the price will be able to recover quickly. I'm not really an oil expert per se, but it seems to me that with the key background factor is not just what these countries are doing by slashing their prices. Of course, they can always increase them, but they're not likely to increase them if the demand for the product is not there. If there's high demand, then oil producers have lots of bargaining leverage, and they can coordinate and to have the price of a barrel of oil much higher than it is at the moment. But at the moment, all the signs seem to be, the pressures seem to be downward rather than upward. And it's against that backdrop that this competition seems rather curious between Russia and Saudi Arabia.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Bruce.
And thank you for watching. Catch us next time on Global Insight. Do svidaniya.